Okay, first question we got coming in this week is from Donovan. Donovan says, I am a 17-year-old junior from Florida, and my A race is Marathon Nationals in July. I got mono in late December and was off the bike until early February. My FTP was down to 260 watts from 290 watts back in December. It says he weighs 135 pounds. I respond well to volume, and before I had gotten sick, my plan had been to train 14 to 18 hours a week. Now I'm only doing 8 or so because I don't want to ramp up too hard. I've been following a trainer road plan for a month and a half now, and my FTP is up to the mid 270s. And here's my question. I still have some mountain bike races starting in April and a few road races before that, but should I go back to base training? I am worried that lowering intensity will mean I won't race as well during my B races, but I also think that maybe I should be doing some more volume. I have not been doing any lifting since being sick as well. Any advice would be appreciated. I'm up for trying any kind of training. I do distance learning for school, so time is not an issue. Thanks so much, Donovan. Well, first off, distance learning sounds awesome. If time is not an issue.
Trainer road, bro? Bro, this is the MatchBox. Why didn't you write into their podcast and ask them for advice? Come on, dude.
Because our advice is better.
I don't think they do listener questions, but no, I'm just kidding.
So
I'm just giving them a hard time.
What I would say is this question actually comes up somewhat frequently. For whatever reason, either somebody is getting to training late because they had a busy holiday season or something, or they were injured or they were sick or whatever, and they're like, well, how important is base training really? Like, I got some races coming up. Do I really need base training? And I would say the answer is, yeah, base training is important. It's very important. Especially if your goal is marathon mountain bike racing. I think if you ignore base training because you've got some early season B races that you want to do a little bit better at, you will probably be sacrificing a better result at Marathon Mountain Bike Nationals in July. Is that correct?
July. Yeah,
in July. Right now, I mean, with the race happening in July, you do have enough time to do a full periodization before Marathon Mountain Bike Nationals. So it's good that your goal is kind of midsummer, not spring or early summer, I guess. And if that is your goal, you might be sacrificing a couple places at those early season B races, but I guess that we have to consider is what's more important to you. Is it more important that you do as well as you possibly can at Marathon Mountain Bike Nationals and maybe the races that happen to be around that time? Or do you want to do a little better at these early season races, which you call B races? And I would probably classify them as B races too, as far as the importance of a national championship versus, I'm assuming these are more local races.
Yeah, so I think we've talked about this before, but one of the important things to consider when you're bouncing back from injury or sickness or just whatever forced time off the bike you have is restructuring your prioritization. So these races that Donovan's calling B races in, the springtime, maybe they were classified as B races before Donovan got sick, but after Donovan got sick, and now that those fall back into what he should be doing is base season training, we might have to just call those C races, in which case they're just training races and you're not doing anything specific for tuning up for those races. And that's okay. That's just accepting accepting the situation for what it is, and that there's been some changes in your overall plan for the season, and just again, keeping in mind what is most important, which is Marathon Nationals for you. So that's probably the way that I would approach it as far as, looking at these, what he's calling B races. I would just really lower the priority of those if you can. It's one thing if you're traveling for those races, in which case maybe you have to consider whether it's worth it or not for you to travel to those races if you're not going to be fit enough to be in the shape that you want to be in and get the results that you ultimately were looking for. Maybe you save those races for true B races that would come later in the season, like May or June, and those would be preparation races for Marathon Nats.
I think I got two things to add. I think what you're talking about with prioritization, like what changes when you go into like a B race or C race or even an A race is your expectations of the outcome. And like obviously for your A race, the expectation is high. Like you want to do as best as possible. And if you're saying that Marathon Nats this summer is your A race and you want to perform the best there, then yeah, you're gonna have to sacrifice some of these other races, especially after getting sick. And so I think just lowering the expectation that you have for yourself, mainly because you got sick, and so your training is a little bit behind schedule, so you're not as fit right now as you had originally planned. So like you're gonna have some lower expectations going into some of these smaller races. And I would just say, yeah, like do what's best for your A race, because there's a reason that you've decided to make that your A race. And so the other thing along with that is like don't over race. It sounds like he said he's doing some early season mountain biking, and even before that he has some early season road racing, but he's also gotten sick, so he's behind on training. So I would look at your calendar and seriously consider, do I need to do all these races, or would it be worth it to do more training? Because anytime you're racing, you're not training. And the more serious I've gotten about the races that I do, the more serious I take my training when I'm not racing. So like if there's a local race, I really have to consider, like, do I want to do this local race, or I could get in a really, really good training session. You could maybe balance doing like using the training races using the local races as training races and making those big days and incorporating that into the training. But like Adam said, you're going to really have to lower the priority, and you wouldn't taper for those. And the primary goal of those low priority races would be to use them as workouts, basically.
Yeah.
When he said he was worried that going back to base training would potentially hurt his B races, is that because they're shorter? They're not marathon races, they're like XCO, or did I make that up?
I don't think it's said.
He didn't specify. I'm
Okay.
guessing it's just because, going back to lower intensity training means he might not have as much sharpness. And he does mention that there are B races in April that are mountain bike races, so you can assume that for any mountain bike race, really you want some top end fitness. So I think that's probably more the main concern.
I was just gonna I asked that because I was wondering why he wanted to do marathon nationals instead of XCO nationals, because if he was doing these shorter races, then come closer to nationals, maybe he could decide, like, I'm better suited, my fitness right now, like top end is there, like maybe I should do that.
Sure.
Or if he just is really excited about the marathon race, maybe he looks more for marathon races earlier in the season.
So is Marathon Nationals going to be the same week as XC Nationals this year? Yeah. Are they both in Roanoke in July?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, why didn't they do that before? Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm not sure why Donovan is choosing one over the other. But
and then the other thing,
I don't know.
When Dylan said we get this question pretty frequently, I was going to say, why trainer road people coming to us for training advice? But yeah, he said his goal was to be doing 14 to 18 hours a week. Should he just add volume when he's on this trainer road plan doing 8 hours a week? It's hard to say, because I don't know if trainer road tries to add in intensity more than 2 days a week. Is that pretty normal?
Well, I can't speak to what they've been doing recently, because I've not looked at their plans recently. I think that they made updates to their plans since I made a video about their training plans, but my big critique of their plans when I made a video about their plans, and this is like 4 years ago at this point, so I don't know, it could be completely different, but what they had riders doing intensity I don't know, 4 or 5 times a week. So
Yikes.
He specifically at the end of his question is like, should I be doing some volume? And I think yes, you should
Yes.
be increasing your volume.
if time,
Assuming that
so
you're doing 2 intensity sessions.
yeah, if time is not an issue for you, I think that one of the most important things that you can do to set yourself ahead of the competition, because I think probably a lot of young riders may not be doing this, and this is setting yourself up for marathon mountain bike nationals coming up, but it's also just setting you up for the long term, like your long-term fitness in this sport, is doing a considerable amount of volume during a base period. And when I say a considerable amount, it's all relative to what you've done in the past, but I wouldn't necessarily give yourself a ceiling. Like, I wouldn't say, okay, 18 hours is the biggest week I'm shooting for. I would do it more so based off of your ability to recover and your fatigue levels. If you get to 18 hours and you're completely smoked, okay, that's a good ceiling and you need some recovery. If you get to 18 hours and you're like, I could probably do more, then maybe that's not your ceiling. Maybe you actually should be doing more, even at a younger age. I hesitate a little bit when I give that advice, because if you are that young, chances are high teens is a lot of hours for you. But I don't know. I would experiment with going as high as you can until recovery really suffers and fatigue really sets in.
Yeah, so now I would also advise, anyone that's in Donovan's similar situation, sounds like Donovan is, if you're using Trainer Road, I consider that to be self-coached, right? Because you don't have someone that's looking over your data and meeting with you regularly to understand the effects that the training is having on you. It's,
AI. AI is looking over his training,
Exactly.
Adam. Dude.
So anyone like that, especially if you're younger, if you're a junior or maybe U23, if you're self-coached, I would definitely and you're trying to push the limits of what you can handle, I would definitely recommend bringing someone into your circle that can kind of, watch over you and check in on you and make sure that you're not pushing the limits too far. So whether that's a parent or a friend or something like that, that can just regularly check in on you and make sure, just have a conversation.
Not a parent or a friend, dude. An ignition coach, Adam. What are you talking about?
That's obviously the
golden
pinnacle
standard
of what you could do. But if for whatever reason that's not within your means,
hey, look, Donovan,
then
we care about juniors and U23s here at Ignition, and that's why we have an entire program that's cheaper for juniors and U23 riders. So I think our standard is $210, but juniors and U23s only pay $180 a month, because that's our way of saying we support young riders. And because you listen to this podcast, I'll give you $100 off your first month.
There you go.
Just put something in the promo code section that says Drew said that I could have $100 off. There you go.
Yeah, but it's just important, it's important for anyone, but especially when you're young and you're going through all kinds of, hormone changes and, emotional things from other, aspects of life. It's just important to have someone looking after you to make sure that you're not pushing yourself too far beyond the edge.
Yeah, I agree.
I will say that I think I spent the most of my teenage years in a state of overtraining, because I was stupid and I didn't know what I was doing, and I was just like, I ran cross country and I biked, so I would never have a rest day, because on the days that I wasn't running, I was like, well, it's the day that I can bike, and I'd bike like 8 hours.
Yeah, but look where you are now.
Don't do that.
All that overtraining has led to this successful cycling career.
Wow, I thought you were gonna say led to me getting constantly dropped, but you went positive with it. Thanks, man.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. Yeah, maybe you did. Maybe you could have been way better, and we would never know.
All right, Drew, we're gonna take a quick break here because it's super cool. This episode is actually brought to us by some new friends over at Bicycle. Bicycle is the marketplace for pre-owned bikes and parts, and it's the safest, fastest, and easiest way that you can sell your bike or pick up a new bike today.
Yeah, we are pumped about this because Bicycle makes listing your bike the easiest thing ever. They give you can do it all through their website. It only takes a few minutes. They give you a fair price on your bike, so you're not just left there wondering how much am I going to get out of this thing. And unlike other marketplaces, you're not stuck waiting for buyers and all that stuff because they connect you to a worldwide web of all kinds of people looking to buy a new bike. So you don't have to deal with local people and all that stuff because you've got the whole world looking for bikes. And so that's pretty sweet. And then another thing is you don't have to chase down payments. They do all of the secure payments all through their website as well. They even give you the prepaid shipping labels. And if you need it, they'll even give you stuff to package up your bike. And on top of that, they come to your doorstep and pick up the bike. It's like the easiest way to sell a bike online.
Yeah, that's right. So if you've got a bike that's just rusting away in the garage, or maybe you just want some extra cash in your pocket for this upcoming race season, head over to Bicycle today and list your bike. And then that way you can do something with that bike because they would rather see those bikes collect memories than collecting dust.
And on top of that, because of our new partnership with them, you get 30% off seller protection with code MatchBox30. So go to bicycle.com. That's BUYCYCLE.com/matchbox and use the code MatchBox30 at checkout to get 30% off seller protection.
Yeah, we'll also post that link in the show notes. So if you want to head over there, it's an easy way to navigate it.
Cool.
Mhm.
All right. So speaking of rest days, let's move on to Tyler's question here, which he is talking about rest days. Strength training. So this is Tyler from Kentucky. It's your neighbor, Drew.
Yeah.
Strength
I don't
training
think I
has been
know
a
him.
hot topic on the podcast lately, so I thought I'd keep the trend going. My coach has told me that he prefers I lift after typical workouts and not on recovery/light days for the sake of getting a true rest day in. And Adam has said the same thing in a more recent episode. Here's my question. Why though? I understand that more weight on the bar on a more rested day versus less on the bar after intervals does not equal less adaptation. And while in theory, I would assume that I'm still building workload capacity just as much either way, I am physically and mentally drained when I go into the gym after a hard interval session to the point where I'm not even doing the full workout between having less time and having accumulated so much fatigue from my workout on the bike. When lifting on recovery/light days, I have personally never noticed any negative side effects regarding intervals or on the bike strength. So with this in mind, is it really that big of a deal to lift on an off day when my aerobic/anaerobic strength doesn't seem to be affected by the gym? And then he sent a little more context. He sent this to me directly. He says, I have about 6 years of strength training experience under my belt, specifically powerlifting. I got into cycling for the sake of hitting the guidelines for cardio and fell in love with it. When I was a gym rat, I would always ride on my off days for lifting and never ran into fatigue issues due to not having a true rest day. So it was a big surprise to me when I started training as a cyclist and would see people say to not lift on your rest days. Look forward to you guys hopefully answering my question in the future. Thanks, Tyler.
Yeah, it makes.
Sweet.
I'm gonna start
Oh,
things
go ahead.
off with a hot take.
All right.
Go for it.
I wanna say that if you are waking up on a rest day and thinking, man, I could go to the gym and just knock out some squats right now, you're not training hard enough.
I knew that you were gonna say that. I like.
Oh my gosh.
As Adam was reading, I was like, Dylan's gonna say this guy isn't. He's either not going hard enough on his bike days or he's not going hard enough on his gym sessions.
Well, okay, so there's different times of year where you should be prioritizing gym versus bike. And I would say off season, you should be prioritizing gym, and you should maybe do your gym session before your bike ride, and you should be doing your gym session fresh so you maximize the gym session. Once you get closer to the season, then you want to flip that and you want to prioritize bike workouts, and gym sessions are kind of secondary. And I would say if you're in that part of the season where you're prioritizing bike, I'm being very serious about this. If you are waking up or just existing on a rest day and you're thinking in your head like, man, I could really go for a gym session right now, like you shouldn't be thinking that on a rest day. This is how you should feel on a rest day. Man, I'm glad I don't have to do anything today. I'm very happy about that. So,
but what you
Let's hear
said
it,
feels.
Caitlin. Come on.
But what you said feels applicable to somebody riding 6 days a week. What if he's riding 4 to 5 days a week?
do we
I feel
know?
like
Do we
there's-
know how many days
feel
a
like
week he's riding?
This is why there's no blanket statements that should be applied. Like your strength days should not be on your rest days. Because if he's I have said that before, but that's saying that to somebody who for them is maxed out in their volume. They're riding 6 days a week. They have a designated off day. So they also want to do 2 strength sessions, pair those with your intensity sessions so on the bike, so that when you're doing a recovery ride, you're not doing strength. Did he also say that he shouldn't be doing his strength on recovery days? Or he was specifically talking about his off day? Either way, yes, I
mean,
agree.
I think they're kind of hard. I mean, we can define the difference, right? I don't think he specifies, but
So I guess there's like gradients to how seriously you're taking cycling, right? So, for example, he gives the example that he used to do. I'm not
demeaning to
I'm not being demeaning. I'm saying there's gradients to how seriously you take cycling, and this is going to answer the question.
Well, he
right?
says he's a gym rat or at
Well,
least
he said he
used to be a gym rat.
So,
Yeah.
So, for example, I'm using that as an example first. So his example is I was a gym rat, and then on my rest days from the gym, I used to ride my bike as cardio. I don't see a problem with that. I think that's okay. Because like, what would that be? Like you're riding your bike 2 days a week, and if it's just some steady state cardio, it's probably not a very hard ride either. Don't necessarily see a problem with that. And then I don't know, you might get into if you're taking cycling more seriously, you might get into the kind of person that's riding 3 days a week or 4 days a week. You could certainly make an argument that some of those. So if you're riding 3 or 4 days a week, that means you have 3 or 4 days where you're not riding, and you could absolutely make the case that you should be lifting on those days that you're not riding. Don't have a problem with that. I think the assumption, at least this is the assumption that I have when somebody writes into this podcast in particular, is that they're at a level of seriousness where their goal is to get faster on the bike, and they're a decently serious cyclist. And I would say at that point, we're probably talking about people that are doing 5 days a week or more, 5 to 6 days a week. And I think that if you're at that point, you're at the point where you should not be lifting on rest days.
There are other days to lift besides just rest days
Workout
and interval
days.
days.
Yeah.
I
Right.
almost always
Yeah.
lift on my endurance days because of the exact reason that he gives in his answer or in his question of like, he's too smoked after intervals to do a gym session. Like I have tried that, and I'm with you, Tyler. I hate that. So I don't do that, but I also don't lift on my rest days. So usually the way I plan out my training is rest day, interval day, and either 1 or 2 endurance days. And before I usually will in the morning do my gym session, and then in the afternoon do my endurance ride. And I don't think there's a problem with that. And that gives me a whole sleep between the intervals and the gym session, so that I feel way better in the gym when I wake up the next day. But maybe you guys have
The other thing that I want to say is that he's saying, oh, like I've done lifts on my rest days, and it's been fine. Like I haven't had too much fatigue. I think the thing that you have to keep in mind is that sometimes this fatigue isn't. It's not. You don't feel the fatigue instantly. It's like it builds up over time. And then you'll get a month or 2 down the road, and you'll just be like fatigued all the time, and you'll be generally tired all the time. And you're like, man, what has happened to me? Like I have all this brain fog. I can barely get up in the morning. I'm not motivated to train. Like during my workouts, I just feel like I don't have the same oomph anymore. I don't know what's happening to me. Like maybe I have some sort of deficiency. I don't know, like I should get blood work done. You know what? You know what probably is happening is that you've just built this chronic fatigue over time. Like that happens to most high level endurance athletes at some point or another.
And I would say it doesn't even have to be high level endurance athletes. It could be, it happens to a lot of endurance athletes that aren't being as structured as they should be with their training.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be high volume loads either. I mean, I fell into this state at some point last year because I went like months at a time without taking any rest days because my training volume was so low relative to what it had been in the past. I just felt like I didn't really need rest days. And then before I knew it, 3 months in, I was like, wow, I'm pretty smoked a lot. Like
that's exactly what I'm talking about, actually.
Yeah, I know. And so, I mean, and my training volume was, 6 to 8 hours a week. It was relatively low, especially compared to 20 hours like I was doing in the past. And I still got into that state. Now, had my training volume been 20 hours, I probably would have hit that state of being much sooner, but I would have also had forced rest days because of it. So I think that's exactly right, Dylan, it's easy in the acute sense to push through those recovery days with a hard gym session and not feel the effects. But 1 month, 2 months, and unfortunately for most people, 2 or 3 months down the road is when you're starting to get into the heat of your season too. So it's like, that's when you want to be feeling the best, and you end up feeling the worst because you put yourself into this chronic state of fatigue. And that's not from volume, that's from frequency of intensity. And that's where I was going to say too. So, Tyler's history with weightlifting, and he was doing, say, 5 days in the gym of weightlifting, which is a lot. That's, it's a lot of lifting, but for power lifters, I mean, that's pretty common. On those off days and you're doing cardio, you're replacing a hard gym session with an easy cardio session. What we're talking about, the flip side here, is you're replacing an easy day with a hard gym session. So it's kind of the opposite. You're not just mixing in a different modality. The gym is supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be, somewhat straining. Otherwise, why are you doing it? It's, you're not going to get the adaptations. And I would say too, I mean, if Tyler's got a history with gym training, he was a powerlifter for 6 years, I'd also question like how much gym work does Tyler need to be doing to have the functional strength that he needs to support his performances on the bike? Are you still trying to maintain that status of a powerlifter, or are you really just trying to optimize for cycling training and cycling performance like Dylan was talking about? In which case, maybe you can reduce your overall training load in the gym altogether because you already have most of the functional strength that you need, and you're just kind of trying to do maintenance work to keep some level of physique and support your demands on the bike.
Yeah, most cyclists have the opposite issue. Like they haven't lifted since high school or college, or maybe they've never lifted in their life, and it's just getting them into it for the first time. So
right,
it's kind of the opposite problem here.
Right. But yeah, so I mean, going back to it though, I mean, the whole concept of lifting on your hard days is just to try and keep that, overall kind of polarized approach in mind, where you're making your hard days hard and your easy days easy. If you're making all of your days moderately hard by either lifting on your endurance days or lifting on your rest days, and then now all of a sudden you have 5 days that week that are hard, that's where you're going to see some problems.
If you are wanting to keep your sessions 45 minutes to an hour because you have a background in strength training and you just really enjoy going to the gym and doing that kind of session, then I would suggest keeping your hard days hard, pairing it with your intensity session on the bike, or trying out what Drew said where it's on your endurance days. Otherwise, the other approach would be you pick, I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, you pick 2 functional movements and you do 4 rounds of those 2. They can be weighted. I think the example I gave was like kettlebell windmill and kettlebell swing or something like that. So that your overall session is like 15 minutes. Like do a warm up with a band or something, knock out 4 rounds of those 2 movements. And then that's enough maintenance to support what you're doing on the bike. And you do that like 3 days a week. And yeah, you're not going to feel smoked after your intensity session on the bike. You're not going to feel too smoked to get that done.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, it's so minimal, especially with your strength training background, that you could even do that as like an extended form of activation before
your intervals. Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When I do, if I have to do the gym session on the same day I do intervals, I usually shorten it to like a 30-minute workout where I just get the main lifts in. That's a good point too.
Maybe a kettlebell windmill and like a kettlebell deadlift, not a swing, because a swing like is a little more cardio. But anyway.
Also, I would encourage Tyler to ask your coach the same thing, because I'd be, you want to make sure you're aligned with your coach too, on what their philosophy is. Okay, let's do this last question. Is from
but if the coach doesn't say what we just said, he needs to fire that coach. Just kidding.
Watch, Tyler probably has an ignition coach. He just didn't tell us. Okay, this last question comes from Lisa from California. She's talking about durability testing. I have a question about durability testing mentioned in both a past MatchBox episode and in Dylan Johnson's recent video. The tests mentioned suggested riding something like 3,000 kilocalories and then doing a standard test such as a 20-minute test. What calorie value would you suggest for less powerful riders? I do about 1,000 to 1,100 calories in about 3 hours of riding. I was thinking that 1,300 to 1,400 would be appropriate. I'm a female in 57 and have been riding for ages. I am not sure what my FTP is at the moment, but I think it is about 162 watts. I had hip replacement surgery about 5 months ago, and the leg took a little while to heal. It is doing much better now, and I feel great. However, I haven't done a recent FTP test. I would clearly be doing a regular FTP test prior to doing a durability test, but I was curious what your suggestion is for less powerful riders.
This is amazing. We just had this entire conversation not recorded on we do a monthly coaches call with Ignition, and that was the exact topic. Was like,
I wish that we did record it because it was a very good conversation.
Well, we're about to record it right now.
I know.
And Dylan wasn't there, so.
And fan of the pod, Peta Mullins, she actually had this same criticism of my idea to test after 2,000 kilojoules. She's like,
yep.
You know how long it takes me to get to 2,000 kilojoules?
That is
that's a lot.
To give PETA and Lisa some credit. Yep, we screwed that up like that. That she's right. Like giving a calorie count is the wrong way to do it. Say what?
I don't remember the last time I've done a 2,000 calorie ride. Like,
really?
That's a lot.
Yeah.
That would be a lot for me.
A calorie count or KJs is a bad suggestion. And I think the conclusion we came to on the call last week, if you just want me to pull the cat out of the bag right at the beginning,
go for it. Do it.
To go for TSS instead.
Yeah,
which is like such a no-brainer. It's like why weren't we doing that before? Why did we even go to KJs? We should have just said TSS to begin with, because TSS accounts for all of what she's talking about. Of
TSS
course,
is relative.
Yeah, relative. There you go. So I mean, of course, she'd have to have her FTP updated, and she says that. But then once she has an updated FTP in whatever software she's using or on her computer or whatever, then you can go based off of TSS, and that should be exactly like more relative to your FTP, and it eliminates the whole KJ's question of it.
Yeah, so one of the things that we talked about was it's the important aspect is that for each rider to establish a set protocol that you're going to follow.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do this, let's say every 2 months, and let's say the idea is to not fully negate, but to kind of, forget about standard FTP testing if you're doing some of these longer endurance events, and instead be more focused on what is your, how are you building your durability throughout the season. So by having a set protocol that you can follow and check in and do, execute every, let's say, 6 to 8 weeks or something like that to just assess where your durability level's at, then as long as you have a consistent protocol to follow, then that's fine. But I would say shifting the mindset from KJs or, calories as your preload before doing the whatever 8-minute, 20-minute, whatever kind of test you want to do. I think that that's beneficial for two things. One, we can actually give a recommended target for people because, doesn't matter what your FTP is, 90 TSS for Dylan is the same as 90 TSS for Lisa here in relative terms. So that's important because it can be more universally, standardized. But also for each individual person, let's say Dylan sets his target at 2,000 kJs before he's going to do his 20-minute power test, and he does that in January. But then by May, his FTP is, say, 30 or 40 watts higher. 2,000 kJs is going to come a lot quicker than 2,000 kJs did in June or in January. So even for him, he's actually doing that test in a less fatigued state relative to where his fitness level is, because his fitness has improved. So if he goes back to just doing, I'm going to do 90 TSS of endurance riding and then do the 20-minute test, then that should get you to the relative state of fatigue, no matter where your fitness level's at. It is important, though, to do this protocol appropriately. Whatever that training load is that you're inducing before you do the test, that's consistent. So you don't want to achieve 90 TSS by one time doing a bunch of tempo work and then another time doing some easy endurance. Like, you want to keep it relatively consistent, and ideally it's just going to be mostly endurance work. So that way you're coming into that test with a relative state of fatigue. That's really all we're trying to target with that.
Yep.
Now, Dylan, I know recently you did a 20-minute test at the beginning, then you did whatever X hours or X KJs, and then you repeated the 20-minute test. Is that something that you're kind of implementing as your protocol moving forward, or have you had other thoughts of how you would want to check in on this?
Well, what I like about that protocol is that I think that if you're a high enough level rider, you could do hours of zone 2 and it'll probably have a minimal effect on your 20-minute power output. That's not the case for all riders. If you're not well trained, you could do hours of zone 2 and it will absolutely have an effect on your 20-minute power output. But I would say, the higher your fitness level gets, and it's certainly when you get to the elite level, I mean, you could probably do 4 or 5 hours of zone 2 and then knock out close to the same 20-minute power as if you were fresh. So I think that there's an argument to be made about actually having some intensity to actually fatigue your body before you do this durability test. And then the thing I liked about doing back-to-back 20 minutes is you get a fresh number and you get a fatigue number, and you can actually directly compare the two. And you can say, this is the percentage drop-off I saw.
Yeah, and if you haven't done an FTP test in a while, I guess you can use that fresh number to set establish your FTP in zones, right?
Yep.
Adam, ask me.
Okay, what's your thoughts, Drew?
Oh, thank you. Like, what's my protocol?
Dude, you usually just butt in, man.
People want to know my protocol too, dude. Dylan's not the show.
Since when do you wait to get asked anything, man?
Well, he specifically said, Dylan, what's your protocol? So I think after we had our call last week, I was paying a little bit more attention of like TSS and all that. So I think my protocol, and I had said this on the call, but now I have it even more a little dialed in. After we had our call last week, I had said that I think my standardized durability testing protocol would be to do a normal warm up. So probably like 30 minutes or so with a couple little efforts to like get the legs loosened up. I'll do a 5-minute all out test, recover from that, and then do a 20-minute all-out test, because Caitlin has mentioned on this podcast before that the 20-minute test was originally designed to be done after a 5-minute all-out test. So now that 20-minute test is actually, I'm doing that the correct way, and I can use that 20-minute test to set my training zones and to update my FTP. And then I will ride until I hit 150 TSS, because I think that's about equivalent to what I was doing when I was trying to do like a certain amount of KJs. I think it was like 2000 KJs or something like that. So like 150 TSS. And once I hit 150 TSS into that ride, I'll do a second 5-minute test so I can compare it to my fresh test at the beginning. And then I can compare those two. I can have a fresh 5 and a fatigued 5. And that's how I would test my durability, I think, moving forward. I haven't done it yet, but that's my protocol.
Cool. So when you say once you hit 150 TSS is when you would do the second 5-minute effort, is that accumulated 150 TSS after the 20 minutes, or is that just once the TSS meter hits 150 for the whole ride, you're going to execute the second 5?
I think for the whole ride.
Okay.
I think somewhere between 150 and 200.
That seems low to me for you.
Yeah, I was going to say I haven't done it yet, but like when I was doing some endurance rides last week and I was comparing KJs to TSS. But yeah, you're right, because then I'll acquire way more TSS because of those efforts in the beginning. So maybe I would push that up to like 200. But I was thinking, 150 to 200.
So Dylan, I know you've got to hop off here. But, one thing we were also talking about on the call last week or whatever, 2 weeks ago, whenever it was that we're not trying to set a universal standard here.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually cater this specific to what your target event is. So let's say your target event is a 50-mile mountain bike race, and it's going to take you roughly 4 hours. Maybe your test protocol for testing your durability has you doing your second effort somewhere around the 3 to 3.5 hour mark, because that's going to be a pretty critical part of your race. Maybe you're doing Unbound and it's going to take you 10 hours. I'm not saying you should go and do a 10-hour ride, but maybe you want to extend that out to say 5 or 6 hours, and you want to actually like test how fresh are you, how fit are you, what is your relative state of fatigue 5 hours into your ride, and then you do that second 20-minute test or 5-minute test or whatever it is. And as far as what the duration is of that test assessment, that can be catered to different demands too. If you're doing a very rolling hill type style race where the longest effort you're ever going to do hard is going to be 5 minutes, then maybe the 5-minute power is what you care more about. If you're trying to prepare yourself for a more steady state extended effort, then maybe you do the 20-minute protocol. You can kind of play around with it. But the important thing is that you keep it consistent. So whatever you're training for, if you're actually trying to test and measure what your improved durability is, then you want to just try and keep that protocol the same, at least for multiple tests. Maybe you're only doing it 2 or 3 times before your A event, just to gauge what your level of preparation is. And then maybe you shift and you've got another different event that you're training for, so you shift what that protocol is. But the important thing is, like, what we're trying to understand is what is your relative preparedness for your racing versus a somewhat arbitrary 20-minute power test that just tells you how good you are off the line and not at the end of the race when it matters most.
I was thinking like the same thing, like there's different levels of durability, but you pretty much said it better than that. Like basically and I was thinking along different levels of durability is like there are longer and longer races that people are training for. So like one person might be thinking, oh, well, I really want to build durability for a 4-hour race. And then somebody else is thinking, I really want to build durability for a 10-hour race. Like that's a big difference. Both of those you need durability for both of those, but those are very big differences.
And there can be different ways to look at it too. So maybe it's, instead of it being an all-out effort for the second one, maybe in the beginning of the ride, you say, I'm going to set my heart rate to 95% of threshold for 20 minutes and see what my power output is. And then later in the ride, you're going to say, I'm going to set my heart rate to the same and see what your power output is. And you can kind of measure your power output across the two.
Based off
because
drift.
Not everyone's going to be doing a maximal effort towards the end of their race, and they want to understand, okay, what is the race pace actually going to feel like? Caitlin, I see you smirking over there. What you got?
I feel like that I know you said we're not trying to create another protocol, but I feel like we shouldn't call this a test. It just sounds like a great workout. And I've done this as a workout. I've done intervals at the beginning, a bunch of endurance intervals at the end. So what is the purpose of making this a test? Because at the end of the day, we're still going to test
So you can brag about it.
We're
Come
still
on.
going to test athletes FTP because that is the current way to set up training zones.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it needs to be a test. I don't know that we have to consider it to be a test.
Yeah,
No,
I feel like it's
you
just
want to measure. I mean, some people really like measuring things and tracking progress. And if you don't test, then you can't really. I guess you could track progress based off of intervals, but
I mean, I do most of my athletes like zone establishment based on their training. You know, we really only do a, you know, quote unquote FTP test, or I always call them FTP assessments. We only do that if I really can't tell what someone's zones are. But most of the time from training, you can get a pretty accurate depiction of what someone's zones should be. Go ahead.
I feel
Dylan.
like training as a whole goes through cycles over the years where it's like more metrics, more data, more metrics, more data, less data, listen to how you feel, less data. Like it's about how you feel. And then it goes in this cycle. Continuous glucose monitor, lactate testing, all of this, do it all, track
you had
it
a
all.
glucose monitor.
I did because I was curious. It's experimentation.
She was in
But
that
at the end of the
part of the cycle.
She was up there.
Yeah.
Now she's.
And athletes as individuals also go through this cycle. And it's just like striking a balance between both. So I know there are athletes that are getting super excited, like, oh, durability test, this is the new thing. This is what I need to pay attention to. But it's just...
So I mentioned this in the call last week too. What I am having my athletes that we're starting to, you know, focus more on this durability aspect and understanding what their performance is in a state of fatigue throughout training. I'm having a lot of them do these efforts just based on RPE, because what I want to know is like, how do you actually feel 5 hours into a ride? And now RPE could be 10 out of 10. I want you to go maximal effort. And we're not actually looking for a power target. It's like, I want you to just go based off feel and let's see what the power output is. But it could also be some of them, it's like 8 out of 10. Because again, I'm not expecting them to do a maximal effort 5 hours into their race. Like, unless it's to the line, you know, if it's an uphill finish or something like that, and it's like whatever you've got to the line, fine. But a lot of times it's like, you know, an 80%, you know, 8 out of 10 effort is it's gonna take to keep them in the group or keep them, you know, off the front of their group or whatever. So I love using RPE when I can with athletes, because I think for race day, it's just really important to know how your body feels. But there's also like a reason for using metrics too. Unfortunately, as coaches, there's no way to actually quantify or assess RPE efforts. You know, we use power because it's objective.
I know. I keep making that. I keep writing into like Garmin, and they haven't put RPE in their computer.
Algorithm yet.
Yeah, like
I know.
what the heck? I want that on my screen while I'm.
Yeah,
You don't need it on your screen, bro. It's in your brain.
That's the joke, Dylan.
Yeah, so for Lisa here, I would just say, you know, going back to it, try TSS. Take whatever, you know, whatever your race duration is going to be, whatever you're targeting, and kind of get an idea of how long that race is going to take. You don't have to go the full extent when you're doing this workout or assessment on a regular basis. But then, you know, just divide that into, you know, usually for endurance pace, I mean, it's about 30 to 35 TSS per hour. So if you're going to try and do it 3 hours into a ride, then maybe you're going to do it around 100 TSS.
Nice.
All right. Anything else? We'll wrap it up.
I think that's it.
All right, cool.
Thanks for the questions.
Thanks, guys. Yep. Let's catch you next week.
See ya.
See ya.